Hello everyone, this is Angela. In today's video, I'm going to be making a rimmed melt and pour soap with embellishments. I'll explain the technique as I go, and I'll leave the recipe and supplies needed in the description box. Melt and pour doesn't involve the use of lye, but to keep your skin and eyes safe, always wear gloves, eyewear, and practice good manufacturing processes. Please be sure to check out the links below to videos for beginning melt and pour soap making. I start by measuring out 6 ounces of clear soap base. I prefer to melt on a double boiler. I feel I have better control over the temperature and lessen the risk of burning the base in the microwave. To this, I'm going to add 5% of the base weight in glycerin, which calculates to 0.30 ounces of glycerin. The additional glycerin will help to keep the flat rim pliable when I shape it into a cylinder. While the soap base is melting, I prepare the colorant of my first layer using Nurture Soap's Lemon Drop Mica. I measure out a 1/4 teaspoon of mica and disperse it in a small amount of rubbing alcohol. This helps to assure I won't have any lumps of mica in my soap base. I like to add about 2 grams of Shea Butter base to my clear base. This gives it a slight opaque look without turning the bright yellow into a pastel. To make the tray for the rim, I will add a link in the upper right hand corner that will take you to one of my previous videos that describes the entire process of how to make the tray. For this project, we're going to need the freezer paper tray to measure out 10 inches by 10 inches. The temperature for the first layer is not crucial, it just needs to be fluid enough to pour a smooth layer. I spray the tray with rubbing alcohol to assure the base flows freely over the large surface area. Once I have the tray evenly dispersed, I spray the base with rubbing alcohol to eliminate any air bubbles that may have formed. When the layer is firm yet still warm to the touch, I use my fondant punches to create a negative space. Since I'm going with a summertime theme, I thought the flowers would add a nice touch. Once the negative space is created, I will fill it in with a second layer of a different color. I like to use a ruler off to the side. It's just somewhat as a guide, so I don't leave a huge awkward looking space somewhere on the rim. I want to make sure not to pull the soap rim away from the tray when I remove the punch. If the airlock is broken, the base from the second layer will not only fill the flowers, but will also seep underneath. Let's speed this process up. To prepare for the second layer, I need to weigh out the flowers that I removed from the first layer. Since I was using 6 ounces of soap base per layer, I will need to add an additional ounce to make up for the negative space. I ended up adding a little more as I decided I wanted to use the extra to create a butterfly embellishment to put on the face of the soap. To this base, I'm adding 0.40 ounces of glycerin to help keep the rim pliable when I shape it into a cylinder. While the soap base is melting, I prepare the color of my second layer using Nurture Soap's Berry Twist Mica. I measure out a 1/4 teaspoon of mica and disperse it in a small amount of rubbing alcohol. When the base had melted, I then added it to my dispersed colorant. I poured off my additional base in a thin layer in several individual molds. I will use these to make the butterfly embellishments later on in the video. When pouring the second layer onto the first layer, the temperature is crucial. It needs to be cool enough as not to melt the first layer, but warm enough to be fluid to flow over your first layer smoothly. Each manufacturer's soap-based melting point is different, so please make note of the temperature that I pour at is not necessarily the temperature that will work for your base or methods. It really takes lots of practice and, of course, lots of trial and error to find that sweet spot. I had a temp of 122 degrees Fahrenheit before I poured this base, and as you can see, it began to firm up right away. When pouring a thin layer, it does start to cool and harden quickly, so I'm keeping it real here. I even get my temperatures wrong at times. No harm, no foul. I just quickly pulled off this layer, which was easy enough since I had sprayed it with rubbing alcohol before I poured. I will just clean it up and remelt the base in the double boiler. After my base was melted again, I sprayed with rubbing alcohol, and this time I poured my base at a temperature of 127 degrees Fahrenheit. It went smoothly over my first layer, and I was able to fill all the flowers and make an even layer out of this second one. I did have a couple of voids, so I had a little bit of base left in my pitcher. I melted that and filled the voids in. At the end, I sprayed with rubbing alcohol and waited for this layer to firm up. With the rim hardened and still warm to the touch, I will tear down the corners so that I can now turn the tray into a liner for the Pringles can. It's really a great way to make double duty of our tray. Now I'm squaring up the edges to the rim because no matter what, I can never make a perfectly square tray. And we want our rim for the final measurement to be 10 inches by 8.5. As you can still see, the rim is very pliable. We want to make a nice seam for the rim so that when we pour our main layer, it won't seep out between the rim and the inside of the Pringles can. To do that, trim a 1/4 inch off the inside of the short end of the rim at a 45-degree angle. Flip the rim over and release the airlock from the tray and repeat this process. Make sure that you're measuring it out to be an 8.5 inches long before you trim that last 45-degree angle. I was really happy to see that I hadn't broken any of the airlocks on the flowers, and I ended up with nice crisp edges. Now that the seam is prepared on the rim, I'm going to mold the rim into the shape of a cylinder, making sure the edges of the seam overlap. Once I've made my cylinder from my rim, I'm going to insert that into the Pringles can. Make sure the edge of the rim is even with the bottom of the Pringles can. Tear off the excess liner. Flip the Pringles can over, remove the excess paper from the top and also the excess soap sticking from the top of the Pringles can. I continue to manipulate and smooth the seam down until I feel I have it locked into place. A full-size Pringles can is a little difficult to get your fingers into, so I usually use the handle of a long spoon to continue to manipulate and smooth down the seam. When I was happy with my results, I placed the cap back on the bottom of the Pringles can. Now I'm ready to melt the base that will go on the inside of our rim. Here I am measuring out 28 ounces of Shea Butter base. And to this, I like to add a few additives. I'm going to add some Kaolin Clay and also some honey powder. To my melted base and additives, I'm going to add my fragrance oil. It did contain vanillin, so I did add a vanilla stabilizer to it as well. The fragrance oil I'm using today is from Candle Cocoon, Peony White Tea. It's not floral, it just has a very nice, soft, white tea fragrance. I set the soap base aside to cool and then began to score the inside of the rim. This is just going to help our layers to adhere to one another. Remember to replace the cap onto the bottom of the can. Once my base reached a temp of 127 degrees, it was time to pour it into the main portion of the Pringles can. Once the soap is hardened and is now cool to the touch, remove your finished soap by removing the lid and gently pushing the soap from the bottom out. Once out and unwrapped from the liner, I generally like to clean and shine up the outside of my soap, which is easily done with some rubbing alcohol and a dry paper towel. I did notice that some of the white base had seeped up underneath the rim, but that's easily removed by taking a palette knife and gently scraping the soap off. I then cleaned it up again with a dry paper towel and a little spritz of rubbing alcohol. I cut the loaf into individual bars so that I could begin the process of attaching the embellishments to the outside face of the soap. In a paper cup, I combined a small amount of black oxide and enough rubbing alcohol to make a thin paste. I will use this to paint the lines on the butterfly. No need to be exact on this, as the excess will be wiped off with a dry paper towel. I finished off the rest of the butterflies by painting the bodies with the black oxide. With a dry paper towel, wipe off the excess black oxide. What remains is the design that was pressed into the soap from the fondant punch. I wanted to give the butterflies a little extra sparkle, so I dispersed a small amount of silver mica in rubbing alcohol and painted small dots onto each wing. To attach the embellishments onto the face of the cut soap, I melted a small amount of Shea Butter base into a paper cup and then with a paintbrush, brushed the warm soap base onto the back of the embellishments, using it as a glue to attach them to the face of the soap. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed watching my video. As always, if you found this video helpful, consider tapping and liking the subscribe buttons. Thank you for supporting my channel, and until next time, happy soaping.